Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD television. I'm Steve Lance. Another flying object shot down. The U.S. military today taking down a flying object over Alaska, prompting questions about who's behind it this time. NTD's Iris Tao brings us the latest from the White House.
Anything to say about the object shot down over Alaska, Mr. President?
Less than a week after the Pentagon shot down a Chinese spy balloon, the U.S. military grounded another flying object over Alaska.
The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. Out of an abundance of caution and at the recommendation of the Pentagon, President Biden ordered the military to down the object.
The White House says the object was discovered on Thursday night, and President Biden ordered to shoot it down Friday morning. The White House adds they are expected to recover its debris as it landed in U.S. waters. But the biggest questions, including who sent this one over and if it's again for spying, are yet to be answered.
We don't know if it's state-owned, and we don't understand the full purpose. We're calling this an object because that's the best description we have right now.
The few details we do know so far include the fact that the object was the size of a small car and was confirmed to be unmanned before it was taken down. The Pentagon wouldn't get more specific in its Friday briefing.
Look, there are going to be times when there's activities happening that we're monitoring that we're not going to go public, especially if it doesn't present a particular or pose a significant threat.
Biden's already facing Republican backlash for taking days to ground the Chinese spy balloon and for saying,
"This is not a major breach."
And lawmakers are now sounding alarms on the many more threats posed by Beijing. Republican Senator Ted Cruz has reintroduced bills to take on Beijing's espionage and influence operations in the U.S. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And the Biden administration's handling of the initial Chinese spy balloon continues to face scrutiny. Joining us next to discuss, we have Christopher Miller. Miller served as the former acting Secretary of Defense during the last days of the Trump administration. He's also just released a new book called Soldier Secretary, and we're happy to have him on to discuss. Former acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, thank you so much for joining us.
Steve, thanks for having me, man.
Chris, throughout your decades career serving in the U.S. military, which you're continuing to serve, as you just mentioned, for which we thank you for, you held multiple command posts, one of which is Director of Special Operations and Irregular Warfare. With regard to the Chinese spy balloon, Chris, how have you been processing this whole situation from a week ago up until this point?
Steve, I've been doing a lot of media, and that's why I was glad to come on here, because that's actually like the best question I've heard. And I've had thousands of questions thrown at me about 1-6 and everything else. And, everybody wants a soundbite about the Chinese spy balloon, but you just hit the absolute essence of what this is about. And this is about how we deal with China. And you talk about irregular warfare, and it's kind of an arcane field, but irregular warfare is indirect approach. It's the gray space. It's about using cyber warfare. It's about using information warfare. It's about using these other tools instead of these hugely expensive aircraft carriers and planes. Because let's be honest, Steve, what do the Chinese fear most? What's Chairman Xi fear most? What's the Chinese Communist Party fear most? That's what we should talk about, not the Chinese people. We should talk about the authoritarian, totalitarian government. They fear instability. And that's what irregular warfare is all about. It's about fomenting unrest. Best case is you use truth, right? Just like we did in the Cold War. What brought down the Cold War is the message of American values that brought down the Soviet Union. It didn't bring down the Cold War, but ended the Cold War. So that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. I really appreciate that nuance.
Absolutely, Chris, and I do want to ask you about your book, but first I just want to follow up. Senior Pentagon officials made the case to the senators yesterday on Capitol Hill in a classified briefing, making the case for them, or the military, not shooting the balloon down from the outset of it entering U.S. airspace. Your thoughts on this and other various possible scenarios as to why they didn't or should have?
I think right now they're doing this Orwellian tap dancing. That's what I talk about in my book. You know, I've been there. I've seen it. I've seen the playbook, right? We'll finally get a serious response, you know, in a year and a half after people have moved on. I'm glad Congress is actually finally doing their oversight responsibilities. It was a little political theater. You know that, Steve. That's not what, that's part of your show, is that like you want to like get beyond the political theater, which is really important. So thanks for that. You know, here's the issue for me is one of two things happened. One is we didn't identify the balloon entering our airspace. That's our sovereign territory. It's not, let's not call it an act of war, but it's definitely an act of espionage. So that's a problem if we didn't identify it. The second issue is if we did identify it and we let it fly all the way across the United States without either disabling it or bringing it down until it left our airspace. That's another issue. What's the decision making on that? And in closing on that, here's the thing. We spent $1 trillion on defense and national security, and we don't have the capability to disable or bring down a doggone balloon. That's the point of my book, Steve. I mean, that's kind of the essence of what I'm trying to get at, is we're spending too much money on stuff that doesn't matter. We couldn't disable or bring down in a controlled manner a doggone balloon. That to me is like that's kind of sums up what I'm trying to do with the book, Steve.
Chris, about your book titled Soldier Secretary, subtitle Warnings from the Battlefield and the Pentagon About America's Most Dangerous Enemies, you talk about your final days in office as Secretary of Defense, which of course included January 6th, that date. What was it like? What should the American people know about that day or period of time?
Another great question, and I appreciate you giving some context and allowing me to provide my view on what happened that day. I want to be perfectly clear. It was a horrendous day for democracy. The point I want to make is your armed forces, your National Guard, performed superbly. The decisions that we made that day, we've been characterized by some on the left as somehow having supported illegal efforts and extra constitutional efforts for the administration to stay in office. That's the height of hypocrisy. Every single person, the first thing they do when they enter the military is they swear an oath of allegiance to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that's what I'm trying to bring out in the book, is like this idea that somehow our military could be used for extra constitutional reasons is beyond reprehensible for those that say it. However, it's something we have to pay attention to. And that's why I'm so fixated on accountability, and why right now the military, and we see it with what's happening with this Chinese spy balloon, taps dances and says all these politically nuanced things. What we really need to do, the way I was raised, is somebody needs to step forward and accept responsibility and accountability. And that's what this book is about.
Former Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Former Vice President Mike Pence had his house searched today by the FBI. And during the search, the FBI found another classified document. NTD's Jason Perry brings us the story.
Members of the press lined up outside of former Vice President Mike Pence's home in Indiana while the FBI searched it for hours. The Bureau was looking for additional classified documents, and they found one. An advisor to Pence told the Epic Times in an email, the Department of Justice completed a thorough and unrestricted search of 5 hours and removed one document with classified markings and 6 additional pages without such markings that were not discovered in the initial review by the Vice President's counsel. Here's Pence on Fox News explaining how the classified documents ended up at his home in the first place.
During the closing days of the administration, when materials were boxed and assembled, some of which were shipped to our personal residence, mistakes were made. We were not aware of it at the time until we did the review just a few short weeks ago. But I take full responsibility for it, and we're going to continue to support every appropriate inquiry into it.
When Pence was asked whether he thinks a special counsel should be appointed for the investigation, Pence said he'd leave that decision up to the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. Attorney General Merrick Garland has appointed special counsels to investigate the classified materials held by President Biden and former President Trump. Trump has said he declassified the materials before leaving office, as presidents can declassify materials and vice presidents cannot. And just the day before Pence's home was searched, media outlets reported that Pence was subpoenaed by special counsel Jack Smith. Smith is currently overseeing the criminal investigations into Trump's classified documents that were kept at his Mar-a-Lago residence. Both of these recent incidents could affect Pence's decision on whether he'll run for president. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The government is ordering embattled freshman Republican Congressman George Santos to officially declare if he plans on running for re-election in 2024. The FEC sent the order in a letter after the New York representative raised enough post-midterm money to trigger filing requirements. Election authorities say Santos has until March 14th to comply. He must declare his candidacy or stop current fundraising. The House Ethics Committee is looking into multiple falsehoods about Santos's background, resume, and campaign finances. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.